So then, I've just completed the first book of the Foundation trilogy, just simply entitled Foundation by Isaac Asimov. A lot of people seem to know him for his short story known as I, Robot. Of course, I get the feeling that probably that movie by Will Smith that came out in the early 2000s helped out a fair bit. And plus, I believe Asimov's laws of robotics are still something that are talked about even to this day. The Foundation trilogy, on the other hand, I'm not really sure is as fondly remembered, which is kind of a pity because, well, at least for the first book, I think it's pretty good. And don't quote me on this, but there's a few little things in the book that make me think of Star Wars. So how about I just jump right into the basic summary of the story. The main thing to keep in mind is that it's not necessarily a straightforward story. It's more of an anthology. The only real parallel I have is Infinity Train. That's another debate for another video. But let me just say I am not happy about that. So the first story starts off with a character known as Harry Seldon. He is an acclaimed professor of psychohistory. Basically the idea of psychology mixed with history. So we got these historical events, as well as the potential ideas of what the people were thinking during these historical events. He is thought of as a radical, as using his skills in this field, he has deduced that the Great Empire, headed in Trantor, which I just can't help thinking of Coruscant when I read of it, is going to crumble in 2,000 years. This is obviously something that the people don't want to hear, and unfortunately, he has also sucked in an assistant as well. Comes from a rather far-off planet, but has excelled in this field as well. Unfortunately, I can't remember his name because he's not talked about very often. So there is a trial for both of them to kind of give their view on this blasphemy that the Empire is talking about. So Harry has a plan in place, simply known as the Foundation. This is something that he had been working on for a while. Basically, him and all his followers have been taking the galaxy's knowledge and trying to contain it all in one giant volume known as the Encyclopedia Galactica. Obviously a riff on the whole Encyclopedia Britannica. However, it is decided that they continue their work, but they must go off to a remote planet that has very little resources. In fact, it's really just one giant desert, very similar to Tatooine, or maybe Arrakis. So that's pretty much the end of the first story right there, which I was honestly kind of disappointed by. At this point, the Foundation's only goal is to get the Encyclopedia Galactica completed. They don't care about anything else. Salvor Hardin, who is mayor of the small settlement that has come up since then, is very concerned about this, since he has to deal with, I guess it's hard to say foreign affairs, probably interplanetary affairs, is starting to notice that out here, the Empire has no way of being able to protect them, so they have to fend for themselves. And as such, they really don't have a whole lot of resources to be able to defend themselves against an attack. And a few planets have taken note of this and have thought about an invasion. Tries his best to plead his case to the board, which is basically made up of all the intellectuals of the planet who make all decisions, obviously in favor of completing the encyclopedia. Obviously, they don't listen because this is in contrast to delaying the encyclopedia because they wouldn't be able to have the time to be able to build weapons or a navy or anything to be able to defend themselves. However, it's pretty lucky because shortly after they arrived on the Foundation, Harry Seldon, the founder, set up this specific amphitheater and said that it should not be open until 50 years. So a week passes after that ill-fated council meeting, and the amphitheater is filled, to then show a hologram of what is left of Harry Seldon. Now, because of his advanced techniques in psychohistory, he was able to predict the future multiple times, actually. And he made this message for the people of the Foundation 50 years from now. Basically, he told them, I did this all on purpose. You are now screwed. You have to find some other way to be able to save yourself. This encyclopedia was just a front to make it so you didn't have any weapons or a military or anything that could defend against outsiders. Good luck with that. So after that disturbing message, the council is pretty much dissolved. They really have no idea what they're supposed to do next. That is when Salvor Hardin comes in and takes over the planet as the mayor. How he does this, I find very unique. So out in this outer rim, or the periphery as it's known in the book, the idea of atomic power, you can tell this book came out in the 50s, as atomic power was how they measured the strength of a civilization, is thought of as something mystical, almost religious. And that is how Salvor Hardin did it. He created a religion of people that knew about all the advanced technology and would then slowly spread their word through to the other planets that were near them. At first glance, this doesn't really seem like a whole lot, but it is actually quite genius, because once the priesthood is established on every planet, they set up their own atomic base in order to be able to spread electricity. And since this religion is part of the Foundation itself, each planet has to be on pretty good terms with the Foundation. Otherwise, the priesthood will curse the population and cut them off from all the electricity. Now, obviously, they have means of electricity before, but nothing nearly as efficient as what this religion was able to give to people. Once again, there is another planet that sees this as a weakness and attempts to use it to take over the Foundation. What they did is they found this massive ship, a remnant of the old empire, that has the ability to annihilate an entire planet within a few blasts. This ruler thinks he is quite clever, as he gives it to the Foundation, basically saying, you need to fix this, otherwise we're going to invade your planet. But yet, in fixing it, they doom themselves as well. Or so he thinks. Salvor Hardin is still basically the head of the priesthood here, and he is able to communicate. And since the ship was repaired with priestly intervention, as soon as this ruler tries to take over the Foundation, the priests then take over, cursing the ship and everything that its mission stands for, shutting down everything, thus leaving it useless. So the ruler thought he was pretty slick until he realized that his power still came from the religion. Now that's two stories right there. The first story ended with Harry Seldon saying the Foundation is doomed, and the second one ends when this king is no longer able to invade the empire. With the next and final story of this anthology, we jump ahead another 70 years. At this point, the priesthood is still around, but they are slowly being taken over by the traders. And when I say trader, I mean people that trade goods and services, not so much they betrayed the Foundation and now they've taken over. They were originally introduced with the priesthood. So with the goods that they sell, they have to install a priesthood on the planet. However, some of these Outer Rim planets are getting smart and realizing that this priesthood is the way to lose independence of a nation. So then enters the master trader Herbert Mahler. He is tasked with trying to establish trade with an outside system known as Corel, or the Corellians. Once again, do you see a little bit of the influence this had on Star Wars? He is able to do so because he did not push the idea of the priesthood when he was giving his goods. However, how he was able to establish dominance is that his goods had a shelf life. They would only last for a year or two, so they had to keep doing trade with them and thus being able to secure a peaceful agreement. However, there was a bit of problem with this mission as well. There was a priest that somehow snuck on board, a hostage of the Carillions, and Haber Malo doesn't do a thing to try to help him. This is considered heresy in the religion because the priests take the #1 spot. You have to do everything you can to help them out. So while he is able to establish trade, he is thus brought to trial for his heresy. However, what's interesting is that Malo has evidence. Basically, when the priest is let out, screaming and flailing, there is a tattoo on his hand that says Corellian Secret Police. It was a trick of the light because it would only show up in natural light as opposed to ultraviolet light that was on the ship. However, there was just enough light coming in from outside to be able to see this tattoo. And thus, Malo is exonerated from this crime and is then swept into the mayor's office, much to the dismay of his rival that brought up the trial in the first place. Now that Malo has the mayor's chair, there is another Harry Seldon crisis, as it has now been known since the Foundation was doomed, and then later when the priesthood was able to give the Foundation all the power it's needed. This third one is realizing that the religion is starting to lose its power, and instead there has to be a new force in order to keep the Foundation relevant. So Malo introduces the idea of the traders being independent from the religion. And at the very end of the first book is this little excerpt from the Encyclopedia Galactica saying, "This was able to nail prosperity for the Foundation for years to come, and thus Malo became famous along with Harry Seldon and Salvor Hardin." Now, if you watched my book reviews before, you know that I am not a very big fan of Frank Herbert's Dune. A lot of people put it up on a pedestal, basically saying Dune did to sci-fi as what Lord of the Rings was able to do to the fantasy genre. It was able to reignite it, and a lot of people hold it up into high esteem. Now, the main reason I am comparing it to this is while I thought Dune just went on and on with the descriptions, it was just so boring. I almost feel like Asimov has the opposite problem. I feel like he doesn't give enough detail, just very vague impressions of what the people look like, what they would dress like, what all these planets look like, all that other stuff. And that's probably one of the reasons why it's a little lesser known, is while the world building is there, two people could read the same book and have two different mental images as to what these worlds and what these people could look like. And that's probably the reason why there hasn't been a Foundation movie. At least that I know of. If there actually was, feel free to tell me about it. I'd be curious to see the interpretation of it. And that's another thing I'll compare to Dune as well, is the idea that Foundation takes place across a galaxy. Dune really takes place on two different planets. The planet that the prince is from, and Arrakis. And the first planet is only really described in passing, dream sequences. It's vaguely like Earth, while Dune is vaguely like the Middle East. And I think that's another reason why Dune is held in high esteem. A lot of people say it's an allegory about the rise of the Muslim faith in the Middle East at the time the book was made. But even then, I'm just not really a big fan of it. But Foundation, that is what I like. So, that's Foundation. It's hard to say when I'll be able to make the next video, but I want to keep reading it to see what happens. And for that video, I will be going for the second book, Foundation and Empire. Until next time, keep having fun.